The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace. Tourists from around the world gathered behind the ornate iron gates, cameras ready, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among them stood Marcus Thompson, a 28-year-old United States Marine on leave, visiting London for the first time since returning from his third deployment in Afghanistan. Marcus wore civilian clothes, a simple gray sweater and dark jeans, but his military bearing was unmistakable. His shoulders were squared, his posture perfect, and his eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had seen combat. He stood quietly among the chattering tourists, his attention focused on the red-uniformed guards standing motionless at their posts. The Royal Guards, known worldwide for their stoic discipline and unwavering composure, had become almost mythical figures. They stood like living statues, their tall black bearskin hats creating an imposing silhouette, their red tunics immaculate despite the London drizzle that had started an hour earlier. Their faces remained expressionless, eyes fixed straight ahead, rifles held at precise angles. Marcus found himself studying one guard in particular. The man appeared to be about his own age, perhaps a few years younger. His name tag, barely visible from Marcus's position, read, Harrison. Guard Harrison stood at the main entrance, his position requiring him to remain absolutely still for 2 hours at a time, regardless of weather, noise, or any distraction the public might provide. As Marcus watched, he noticed something that the casual observers missed. Guard Harrison's breathing was controlled and deliberate. His stance showed years of military training, and despite the touristy atmosphere around him, there was an undeniable aura of professionalism and strength. Marcus recognized these qualities immediately. They were the same ones drilled into him during his years in the Marines. The crowd around Marcus grew larger as the official ceremony time approached. Children pressed against the barriers, adults held phones high above their heads, and tour guides spoke in multiple languages, explaining the history and traditions they were about to witness. The noise level increased, but Guard Harrison remained unmoved, his concentration unbroken. Marcus stepped closer to the barrier, his military instincts drawing him toward a fellow service member. He had heard stories about the Royal Guards, how they trained for months to achieve such discipline, how they could stand motionless for hours in extreme weather, how they had to maintain their composure even when tourists tried to make them laugh or flinch. A group of teenagers near Marcus began making jokes, trying to get the guards' attention. They waved their hands, made funny faces, and even called out silly comments. Guard Harrison's expression never changed. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon, his face a mask of professional composure. Marcus felt a surge of respect for the young soldier's discipline. The rain began to fall more steadily, and Marcus watched as droplets formed on Guard Harrison's bearskin hat and rolled down his red tunic. Still, the guard remained perfectly still. Marcus thought of his own training, of the long hours standing at attention under the unforgiving sun at Paris Island, of the mental strength required to maintain military bearing under pressure. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus found himself in an unusual position. He wasn't just another tourist anymore. He was a fellow warrior, observing another warrior at work. Without fully realizing it, Marcus straightened his own posture, squaring his shoulders and clasping his hands behind his back in a modified parade rest position. The change in Marcus's demeanor was subtle, but noticeable. The tourists around him continued their chatter and photo-taking, but Marcus had entered a different mental space. His eyes locked onto Guard Harrison's position, and he began to mirror the guard's perfect stillness. Guard Harrison, trained to be aware of his surroundings despite his motionless appearance, noticed the change in the crowd's energy. Through his peripheral vision, he detected someone standing differently than the rest. Without moving his head or eyes, he became aware of the American tourist who now stood at attention among the casual observers. The rain continued to fall, creating small puddles on the ancient courtyard stones. Tour groups came and went, but Marcus remained in position. His military training kicked in automatically, the ability to remain still and focused despite discomfort, the mental discipline to maintain composure under observation. Other tourists began to notice Marcus's unusual behavior. Some pointed and whispered, others took photos of the American who seemed to be playing statue alongside the real guard. But Marcus wasn't playing, he was honoring a fellow service member in the only way he knew how. Minutes stretched into a quarter of an hour, then 20 minutes. The official ceremony was still 30 minutes away, but an unofficial ceremony had already begun. Two soldiers from different countries, different services, different backgrounds, had found themselves connected by the universal language of military discipline and mutual respect. Guard Harrison felt the presence of the American's unwavering attention. He recognized the quality of the stranger's stillness. It wasn't the awkward attempt of a tourist trying to mimic him, but the genuine bearing of someone with military training. The realization sent a small surge of professional pride through him, though his expression remained unchanged. The crowd around them began to quiet slightly, sensing that something unusual was happening. The tourists who had initially laughed at Marcus's behavior started to watch more respectfully. Children tugged on their parents' sleeves, pointing at the two men, one in uniform, one in civilian clothes, both standing with identical precision and focus. Marcus's mind drifted to his fallen brothers in arms, to the flag-draped coffins he had helped carry, to the memorial services where military precision was the highest form of respect they could offer. Standing in that London courtyard, soaked by English rain, he felt connected to something larger than himself, the brotherhood of soldiers that transcended national boundaries. The morning air grew colder, but neither man moved. Marcus's legs began to ache slightly. A familiar sensation from countless hours of standing at attention during his military career. He embraced the discomfort, knowing it was nothing compared to what he had endured in the desert heat of Afghanistan or during the grueling training that had forged him into a Marine. As the crowd continued to grow in anticipation of the official ceremony, word began to spread about the American tourist who was standing motionless in solidarity with the Royal Guard. People started taking more photos, but the atmosphere had shifted from amusement to respect. Guard Harrison maintained his position with the same unwavering discipline he had shown for the past hour, but internally he was moved by the stranger's gesture. In his 3 years of guard duty, he had seen thousands of tourists, dealt with countless attempts to break his composure, and witnessed every form of behavior from reverent respect to outright mockery. But this was different. This was recognition from one warrior to another. The rain had stopped, but the courtyard stones remained slick and gleaming under the pale London sun that broke through the clouds. Marcus had now been standing motionless for nearly 45 minutes, his civilian clothes damp, but his resolve unshaken. His military bearing had drawn more attention, and a small crowd had formed specifically to watch this unexpected display of solidarity between the American visitor and the Royal Guard. A young British journalist named Sarah Chen, covering the daily ceremony for a local newspaper, noticed the unusual scene unfolding. She had covered hundreds of these ceremonies, but she had never witnessed anything quite like this. The professional way the American stood, the respectful silence that had fallen over the immediate crowd around him, and the palpable sense of mutual recognition between two soldiers created a story that went beyond the routine pageantry she usually reported. Sarah carefully moved through the crowd, taking notes and observing the dynamics at play. She noticed how other tourists had begun to lower their voices when they approached the area where Marcus stood. Children who had been running around playfully now walked more quietly past him. Even the tour guides had modified their usual loud commentary, speaking in more subdued tones when their groups passed by. Guard Harrison had been on duty for over an hour now, still maintaining his perfect posture and unwavering gaze. But he was acutely aware of the American's continued presence. Through years of training, he had learned to observe his surroundings without appearing to do so, and he could sense the respect and discipline radiating from the stranger behind the barrier. Marcus felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him, but he remained focused on his own internal discipline. His mind wandered to his Marine brothers back home, to the ceremonies they had shared, to the silent moments of respect they had observed together for their fallen comrades. Standing in this foreign courtyard, he felt connected to every soldier who had ever stood guard, who had ever maintained a post, who had ever served with honor and dedication. An elderly British veteran named William Chambers was among the crowd that had gathered to witness this unusual display. William had served in the Royal Navy 40 years earlier and recognized immediately what he was seeing. He understood the language of military respect that was being spoken silently between these two young men. Tears formed in his eyes as he remembered his own days of service and the bonds he had shared with fellow servicemen. The official ceremony was now only 15 minutes away, and palace staff began making their final preparations. The guards who would be changing posts started their approach, their movements precise and coordinated. The drums and musical instruments were being arranged, and the crowd grew larger and more excited. But in the midst of all this preparation and anticipation, the silent exchange between Marcus and Guard Harrison continued. Neither man had acknowledged the other directly, but their mutual respect was communicated through their shared commitment to military excellence and discipline. Marcus's legs were beginning to feel the strain of standing motionless for so long, but he pushed through the discomfort. He thought about the long marches in full gear, the desert patrols that lasted for hours, the times he had to remain alert and focused despite exhaustion and danger. This was nothing compared to what he had endured in combat zones, and it was the least he could do to honor a fellow serviceman. A small group of American tourists recognized Marcus's military bearing and began to realize that he was likely a service member himself. One woman approached the barrier near him and quietly asked if he was in the military. Marcus, without breaking his stance or looking away from Guard Harrison, simply nodded once. Word quickly spread through the American portion of the crowd that one of their own was paying tribute to the British Guard. The atmosphere continued to evolve as more people understood what they were witnessing. This wasn't just entertainment or a tourist attraction anymore. It had become a genuine moment of international military brotherhood. People began taking photos, not for social media amusement, but to capture something meaningful and profound. Guard Harrison could feel the shift in the crowd's energy. The usual mix of curiosity, amusement, and casual interest had transformed into something deeper. He had experienced moments like this before, during memorial services and military funerals, where the weight of respect and honor created a palpable atmosphere of reverence. The palace guards who were approaching for the changing ceremony noticed the unusual crowd formation and the American tourist standing at attention. They exchanged subtle glances among themselves, recognizing the significance of what was taking place. In their years of service, they had developed a keen ability to distinguish between genuine respect and mere curiosity. Marcus's breathing remained controlled and steady, his eyes fixed on Guard Harrison's position. He could feel the history of the place around him, centuries of British military tradition, countless guards who had stood at these posts before. The weight of duty and service that connected soldiers across time and cultures. The morning sun grew stronger, drying the remaining raindrops from the courtyard stones. The crowd had grown to over 200 people, many of whom were now aware that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Tour guides had begun incorporating the scene into their commentary, explaining to their groups about the universal bonds of military service and the respect that soldiers show one another across national boundaries. A military photographer who happened to be in London on assignment noticed the scene and began documenting it with his professional equipment. He understood immediately what he was seeing and knew that these images would tell a powerful story about service, respect, and the brotherhood that exists among warriors worldwide. Marcus felt his military training take over completely. His mind entered the same focused state he had experienced during important ceremonies and critical missions. Time seemed to slow down, and his awareness of everything except his own discipline and the guard's presence faded into the background. Guard Harrison had reached a similar state of focused concentration. Despite the growing crowd and the approaching ceremony, his world had narrowed to the essential elements of his duty, maintaining his post with perfect precision and honoring the trust placed in him by his service and his country. The two men, separated by barriers and nationality but united by their commitment to military excellence, continued their silent tribute. Neither knew the other's name or background, but they shared something deeper than personal acquaintance. They shared the bond of those who had chosen to serve something greater than themselves. As the official ceremony preparations reached their final stages, the crowd's anticipation grew. But for Marcus and Guard Harrison, the most meaningful ceremony had already been taking place for the past hour, a ceremony of mutual respect, shared sacrifice, and the universal language of military honor that needed no words to communicate its profound message. The official changing of the guard ceremony was about to begin, and the courtyard filled with an electric anticipation. The military band had taken their positions, their instruments gleaming in the strengthening sunlight. Hundreds of tourists pressed against the barriers, cameras and phones held high, all eager to witness the famous British pageantry they had traveled thousands of miles to see. But something unprecedented was happening. The crowd's attention was divided between the approaching official ceremony and the ongoing silent tribute between Marcus and Guard Harrison. What had started as curiosity had transformed into genuine reverence, and many spectators found themselves more moved by this spontaneous display of military brotherhood than they expected to be by the scheduled events. Marcus had been standing motionless for over an hour now. His Marine training sustained him, but more than that, his deep respect for Guard Harrison's dedication drove him to maintain his position. He could feel the weight of the moment, not just the physical strain of standing at attention for so long, but the emotional significance of what they were sharing. Two soldiers from different worlds, connected by the universal values of duty, honor, and service. The approaching guards for the ceremony moved with the precision that had made them famous worldwide. Their steps were perfectly synchronized, their bearing immaculate, their uniforms pristine. As they drew closer to Guard Harrison's position, they too became aware of the American tourist, who had been standing in tribute for the past hour. Captain James Morrison, the officer leading the ceremony, had 20 years of experience in the British Army. He had served in Afghanistan, had commanded troops in difficult situations, and had participated in hundreds of these ceremonial duties. But as he approached Guard Harrison's post, he noticed something that made him pause internally, even as his external demeanor remained professionally composed. The American tourist wasn't just standing still, he was demonstrating genuine military bearing. Captain Morrison's trained eye immediately recognized the quality of Marcus's posture, the controlled breathing, the focused concentration that could only come from extensive military training. This wasn't a tourist playing at being a soldier. This was a real serviceman paying respect to a fellow warrior. Guard Harrison had reached a state of almost meditation-like focus. His body remained perfectly still, but his mind was deeply engaged with the significance of what was happening. In his 3 years of guard duty, he had experienced many memorable moments, visits from dignitaries, special ceremonies, challenging weather conditions, but this silent exchange with the American had become something profoundly meaningful to him. The crowd had grown quiet in a way that rarely happened during these ceremonies. Usually there was constant chatter, the clicking of cameras, children asking questions, and tour guides providing commentary. But the atmosphere had shifted. People sensed they were witnessing something authentic and significant, and many felt compelled to show respect for what they were seeing. Marcus's mind drifted to a memorial service he had attended for a fallen Marine brother 6 months earlier. He remembered the perfect silence of the honor guard, the precise movements of the flag ceremony, the way military precision had served as the highest form of tribute they could offer. Standing in this London courtyard, he felt connected to that moment and to every similar moment in military history when soldiers had honored their fallen and their serving brothers. The band began to play, signaling the start of the official ceremony. The music was stirring and martial, designed to inspire and impress the gathered crowds. But for Marcus and Guard Harrison, the most powerful music was the silent rhythm of their shared discipline and mutual respect. Sarah Chen, the journalist, had been taking notes and photos for over an hour now. She realized she was witnessing a story that went far beyond the usual tourist coverage of the changing of the guard. This was a human interest story about service, sacrifice, and the bonds that connect soldiers across all boundaries. She made a mental note to research the Americans' background if possible and to capture the full meaning of what she was seeing. As the official ceremony proceeded around them, Marcus and Guard Harrison continued their own private ceremony. The formal changing of the guard involved precise movements, shouted commands, and choreographed exchanges between the incoming and outgoing guards. It was impressive and moving in its own right. But the silent tribute happening simultaneously had its own power. William Chambers, the elderly veteran in the crowd, found himself wiping away tears as he watched. He understood the depth of what was taking place because he had lived it himself decades earlier. The respect these young men were showing each other brought back memories of his own service, of the bonds he had formed with fellow servicemen, of the pride and honor that came with wearing his country's uniform. The morning had grown warmer, and Marcus could feel sweat beginning to form under his civilian clothes. But he remained focused on his tribute, drawing strength from his knowledge of what Guard Harrison was enduring. The guard's uniform was heavier, his position more exposed, his duty more demanding, yet he continued to serve with unwavering dedication. Captain Morrison, as he conducted the ceremony, found his respect for both men growing. He had served with Americans in Afghanistan and knew the quality of their military training and dedication. Seeing this spontaneous display of international military brotherhood during his own ceremony added an unexpected layer of meaning to the day's events. The crowd's behavior had become almost as disciplined as that of the two soldiers they were watching. Children stood quietly beside their parents. Tourists spoke in whispers, if they spoke at all, and even the most casual observers seemed to understand that they were witnessing something special. Guard Harrison felt the approach of the changing ceremony but remained focused on his current duty. He knew that his relief would arrive soon, but until that moment, he would maintain his post with the same perfection he had shown for the past 2 hours. The Americans' continued presence had transformed this duty from routine to meaningful, from individual to shared. Marcus could see the ceremony unfolding around them, but his attention remained fixed on Guard Harrison. He understood that his tribute would end when the guard's duty ended, but until that moment, he would continue to stand in solidarity with his fellow servicemen. The official ceremony reached its climax with the formal exchange between the old and new guards. Commands were shouted, movements were executed with perfect precision, and the crowd watched with appreciation for the skill and tradition they were witnessing. But many in the audience found their eyes drawn equally to the ongoing silent tribute between the American Marine and the British Guard. As the moment approached for Guard Harrison to be relieved of his duty, Both he and Marcus prepared for the end of their shared experience. Neither had spoken to the other. Neither had made any direct acknowledgement of the other's presence, yet both had been profoundly affected by this hour of mutual respect and recognition. The crowd seemed to sense that something significant was about to conclude, and the atmosphere grew even more focused and reverent as the official ceremony moved toward its completion and the unofficial ceremony between the two soldiers approached its natural end. The moment of transition had arrived. Captain Morrison approached Guard Harrison's position with the incoming guard who would relieve him. The formal exchange was about to take place, following centuries of tradition and protocol. The crowd watched with rapt attention as the ceremony reached its conclusion, but everyone was also aware that the silent tribute between Marcus and Guard Harrison was about to end. Guard Harrison could see his replacement approaching from his peripheral vision. After nearly 2 hours of motionless duty, he would soon be relieved. But the approach of this moment filled him not with relief, but with a strange reluctance to break the connection he had formed with the American stranger who had stood in solidarity with him for over an hour. Marcus sensed the change in the ceremony's rhythm. He could see the guards moving into position for the formal exchange, and he knew that his tribute was reaching its natural conclusion. The thought of ending this profound connection filled him with unexpected emotion. He had not anticipated how meaningful this silent exchange would become, how deeply it would affect him. Captain Morrison positioned himself beside Guard Harrison and spoke the traditional words of relief. "Guard, you are relieved." These simple words carried the weight of military tradition and the formal end of duty. Guard Harrison, maintaining his perfect composure, executed the precise movements required to transfer his post to his replacement. But something unprecedented happened. As Guard Harrison completed the formal transfer and prepared to step away from his post, he did something that broke decades of protocol. Instead of immediately joining the departing formation, he turned slightly toward the barrier where Marcus stood and, for the first time in over 2 hours, made direct eye contact with the American Marine. The crowd fell completely silent. Even the military band seemed to pause, though the music continued. Every person in the courtyard understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that transcended the usual boundaries of military ceremony and protocol. Marcus met Guard Harrison's gaze, and in that moment, two warriors acknowledged each other across the barriers of nationality, service branch, and circumstance. No words were spoken, but the communication was profound and complete. Years of military training, deployments in dangerous places, sacrifices made for their countries, and dedication to values larger than themselves passed between them in that single look. Then, slowly and with the same precision that had marked his entire duty, Guard Harrison brought his right hand up in a crisp military salute directed at Marcus. It was a gesture of respect from one soldier to another, a recognition of shared service and mutual honor that needed no explanation or justification. Marcus, without hesitation, straightened to full attention and returned the salute with equal precision. His civilian clothes could not disguise his military bearing, and his salute was as sharp and respectful as any he had ever given to a superior officer. The two men held their salutes for a long moment, communicating volumes in their silence. The crowd erupted. But it wasn't the excited chatter of tourists who had seen something amusing. It was applause. Genuine, heartfelt applause from hundreds of people who recognized that they had witnessed something authentic and moving. Children clapped their hands, elderly veterans wiped away tears, and tourists from dozens of countries joined together in appreciation for what they had seen. Captain Morrison, despite his strict adherence to military protocol, found himself moved by what had just occurred. In 20 years of military service, he had seen many displays of courage, honor, and dedication, but this spontaneous recognition between two soldiers from different nations touched him deeply. He made no move to discipline Guard Harrison for his breach of protocol. understanding instinctively that some moments transcended regulations. Guard Harrison completed his salute and, with the same military bearing he had maintained throughout his duty, rejoined his formation. But as he took his position among his fellow guards, he carried with him the knowledge that his service had been recognized and honored by a fellow warrior. The routine duty had been transformed into something memorable and meaningful. Marcus slowly lowered his salute and relaxed his stance for the first time in over an hour. The sudden change from rigid attention to normal posture sent small waves of relief through his muscles, but the emotional impact of what had just occurred far outweighed any physical discomfort he had endured. The crowd began to surround Marcus, with people wanting to speak with him, to thank him, to understand what had motivated his extraordinary tribute. But Marcus found himself overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment. The simple act of standing in solidarity with a fellow serviceman had affected him more deeply than he had expected. Sarah Chen, the journalist, approached Marcus respectfully and asked if she could speak with him about what had just happened. Marcus, still processing the emotional weight of the experience, agreed to talk with her. He explained that he was a U.S. Marine on leave, that he had simply wanted to show respect for a fellow soldier's dedication, and that the experience had moved him more than he could have imagined. William Chambers, the elderly British veteran, also made his way over to Marcus. With tears in his eyes, he thanked the young American for what he had done. "You honored all of us who have served," he told Marcus. "That young guard will remember this for the rest of his life, and so will everyone who witnessed it." As the official ceremony concluded and the guards marched away, the crowd began to disperse, but many people lingered, still talking about what they had seen. The story spread quickly through social media, with photos and videos of the salute exchange being shared around the world within hours. Guard Harrison, as he marched away with his unit, felt a profound sense of completion. His duty that morning had started as routine service, but it had become something far more significant. The recognition from the American Marine had validated not just his individual service, but the dedication of all guards who stood their posts with honor and professionalism. Captain Morrison filed his report of the day's ceremony, but he found himself struggling to capture in official language what had actually taken place. How could he document the moment when protocol gave way to human connection, when military ceremony became personal tribute, when two soldiers from different nations found common ground in their shared commitment to service? Marcus remained in the courtyard for a long time after the crowds had dispersed, reflecting on what had happened. He had come to London as a tourist, expecting to see a famous ceremony and take some photos. Instead, he had participated in one of the most meaningful military experiences of his life. The silent hour of standing with Guard Harrison had reminded him why he had chosen to serve, why military values mattered, and how service connected him to warriors throughout history and around the world. As the sun climbed higher over London, the ancient courtyard returned to its normal quiet. But the echoes of what had occurred that morning would continue to resonate in the lives of everyone who had witnessed it. Two soldiers had met across barriers of nation and circumstance and had recognized in each other the timeless values of duty, honor, and service that define the warrior's calling. Their silent duel had ended not in victory or defeat, but in mutual respect and the understanding that some bonds transcend all boundaries.